Welcome to They Live by Film, a film discussion podcast focusing on the Criterion Channel and beyond. My name is Adam, and I am joined as always by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. How are you doing today?
Good. Apparently, according to Chris, the podcast stops at midnight instead of the war starting at midnight.
That's a nice tie into our first discussion, actually. Yeah. Chris, any news with you before we get cracking?
No, not really. I was trying to think if there's a theme this week. I can just say that we're now getting into the phase of life where we're scouring other people's neighborhoods to find what neighborhoods have the best Christmas lights so we can drive around and try to not seem like a creeper.
I think that must just be like a worldwide phenomenon where it's just let's just drive around and see who has the nicest house with all the Christmas lights. Pretty much, we do that in Ireland here as well. Yeah. There's always like one house in town that every year everyone goes to look at their house because they just have all the crazy shit outside.
Yeah, but you have to understand. I'm from the South, so you guys take your Christmas lights down.
Like, what's this talk about different Christmas lights? That's funny. No, but I pretty much just ready to talk about these. I'm a little bit nervous to hear y'all's reaction to my my take on Colonel Blimp because I think it's going to open up a can of worms. So I'll just leave that hanging out there. But let's jump in. I'm excited.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes. Yeah, well, cat's out of the bag. First film we're going to talk about is The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, 1943 picture by the dynamic director duo Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. Just to give you a really brief synopsis from IMDb, from the Boer War through World War II, a soldier rises through the ranks in the British military. IMDb is so weird with some of these descriptions. You know, sometimes they're really good. Other times they're like super long. But this is it's just a bit basic. Yeah, I suppose it is essentially this. So we follow this character who's not called Colonel Blimp. No character, in fact, is called Colonel Blimp in this film. But we follow this character through three definitive stages in his life as a young soldier, a sort of, in the trenches of war soldier, and then like a sort of a retiree. Just following through different stages of his life as he comes to terms with, what it's like to be a military man and all that nice good stuff. First off the bat, Chris, what's the consensus regarding our friends at They Shoot Pictures?
Number 200.
Okay, that's high.
Yeah,
pretty high.
Very, very high. I was surprised to see that. I probably like the film the least out of the group, so I don't want to spoil too much about what I'm going to say.
Well, don't speak too soon, perhaps.
Okay, good. Well, we'll see then. But yeah, 200 felt very high for me.
Now, I'm curious. I know there's a thing we've talked about. I think you brought it up, Chris, that this was like as a consensus best British film of all time. I'm guessing that's not the case on They Shoot Pictures, would be my random guess. Because I'm sure Lawrence of Arabia, that's a British film, right? David Lean?
Yeah, it's David Lean. So yeah, I'd go with a British.
I mean, I assume there's quite a bit on They Shoot Pictures higher.
So there are. So right ahead of it, I don't want to spend too much time, but just at a quick glance, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 films ahead of it before we even get to number 150.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was actually, I meant to track down the source of that, but on one of the Wikipedia descriptions or somewhere it talks about this was regarded as one of the greatest British films of all time.
Probably just one newspaper said it.
Was it the Atlantic? I think I found it too. Was it the Atlantic?
Okay. I don't actually know, so that I'm glad you found it. Yeah. The Atlantic, isn't that an American newspaper?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bold play.
None of us read the newspaper.
But it's just I think it's just one of those things where a newspaper will say it, and it's one of those things that you put on like the DVD cover. Exactly. Every DVD cover just has a blanket statement from some random publication. It's definitely not the best British film I've ever seen. It's not even the best film from Powell and Pressburger that I've seen. So, look, I'll start off then, I suppose. I have a very difficult relationship with The Life and Death of Colonel Powell because I very much love or Colonel Blimp, sorry, because I very much love Powell and Pressburger. The Red Shoes, in particular, in my opinion, is one of the greatest films of all time. Black Narcissus is also fantastic, if maybe a little problematic by today's standards in terms of its depiction of Indian people. But Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, it's an immaculately well-made film in terms of its set design, its costuming, its makeup, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Its makeup is incredible, and then just it's a Powell and Pressburger, so it just looks gorgeous in terms of color and scope and everything like that. I just have a problem with films that fetishize the British military, and this definitely does do that. So I have trouble liking a film that does that just because of, as you can tell by my accent, I'm from Ireland, diddly dee. So anything that fetishes the British military just rubs me the wrong way. It's just natural. But in terms of like purely cinematic, it's a great film in terms of how it's made and everything like that. It's just I have a problem with the content.
I did, because it's definitely like extremely pro British. I don't think there's any way to deny that, but I do think it feels like it has sort of a, I don't know if the word cynical would be right, a cynical view of like the bureaucracy of war, like how traditionalized it is and how much of a formality it is. Like we'll get into it like when we get into like the duel and stuff, but it's just so standardized to the point that it's ridiculous. And I didn't know.
Mm.
I kind of got. I like I said, there's no way to deny it's pro British, but I do think there is. I don't know if you'd call it satire or cynicism, but I did feel a little bit of that in there.
What about you, Chris?
Thinking a little bit. Sorry for the delay there. I was trying to think a little bit about what Zach just said. Um, I want to talk about that more in a second, Zach. Here's the problem I had with it, and see where this goes. Okay, the first, let's call it 90 minutes, I was totally hooked, right? It's this very engaging story about this sort of rambunctious young, kind of rising general, and he goes on this mission to Germany, and he has to think on his feet, and it's clever. And there's a sword fight, and it's kind of funny because they both get hurt, and the way that it plays out, I think, is entertaining. There's a love interest, and like I was hooked. Like I thought it was like an excellent film. And then they did this thing that I just don't like, and so this is kind of just a personal bias. I don't like films that track through the life of a guy or a girl. Like I don't necessarily like can't think of a film that I love that does that. And the first thing that comes to mind is like maybe The Godfather. They kind of do that over three movies in a way. So I don't know. That's maybe hurts my argument a little bit. But like outside of that, I just don't know that I've ever seen a movie that I love where it's just about, like let's follow this one person kind of through their life. Like it's even something I struggle with in Cinema Paradiso a little bit, as much as I know that film's beloved. It's just a little bit boring to me. Like I want to see, like like the story of this young guy that was coming up in the military, had a love interest. That's a 90-minute story. It's interesting. Maybe there's a way you can kind of do something that adds some stakes to make that a 2-hour movie. Like if it ends there, I'm totally hooked. But as it went on and they did aging makeup, which by the way, the aging makeup was great. It was quite amazing. But I just cared less and less. And by the end, I was pretty bored. And so
I think this era of filmmaking tended to do those kind of films a lot, those sort of life in a movie kind of films. Like when I watched this, like it even had that kind of style to it. And I don't know if maybe this is not going to track with you Americans and American listeners, but it just reminded me of the kind of film that your grandfather would watch on a Sunday morning. A lot of times in Ireland, they'll show these kind of films on like a Sunday morning after mass and stuff. And it's just something you'll throw on because it'll be on because it's a long film and there'll be sort of commercial breaks. It will like take up like a 3 or 4 hour slot in the afternoon on a Sunday when nothing else is really on. And it just reminded me of those kind of films. Like growing up, like you just on a Sunday, there'd always be these sort of old Hollywood films that always tended to be like, in Technicolor, and they were always about the life of a person, and it would just go all the way through their life and everything like that. And it was, I think they just made like a lot of these films at this time. Like, I agree with you, I'm not really a big fan of that format in general. I think what made it tolerable for me was the amazing makeup. The fact that they had the same actors the whole way through, which I honestly I did not realize the guy from the first part was playing. I'm going to get the actual character's name. Candy. It's not Colonel Blimp. It's Candy. I didn't realize he was playing him the whole way through. I thought there was two actors.
Me too.
One
You
when he
just
was
blew my
young.
mind a little bit.
Yeah, it's one actor the whole way through. I did not realize. I knew I could figure out that the guy, it was the same person for the First World War and the Second World War. But I did not think that the first guy was the same person the whole way through. I only realized when I was typing up my review and I went to go look at the cast list so I could get both actors' names. And I was like, wait, it just blew my mind. That's the only thing that made the whole aspect of going through a person's life tolerable to me, was the makeup and the hair and everything like that was just phenomenal.
I will kind of go back where you were talking about, Chris, where there's exceptions to it, but every exception I can think of or end up being gangster films. Like you look at The Irishman or The Godfather, or even like Scarface to a point, although that one's kind of short lived. But this whole idea of rise to power kind of makes sense over a long period of time, where he kind of gets lost in these type of that's the way I kind of feel about it, because I don't disagree with you. I'm way more interested in the first part of the film versus the second and third act.
That's actually a great nuance. When the aging serves a great purpose in the film, like a rise to power, then it's good, because it's sort of like that's the reason why you're watching this aging, right? Is you're seeing, like, there's a great example. This is going to be a really obscure film. Did y'all ever see this old movie called Blood In, Blood Out?
No, but that's a great title.
It's about kind of like Mexican crime, like gangs in Los Angeles, I believe. But it's sort of a life, and it follows this one guy, it tracks with this one guy as he kind of rises to power a little bit. And it has a little bit of that. Although, wait, actually, I take it back. I don't know if he ever actually gets to be an old man. It doesn't matter. That's a tangent anyways. But I liked your point that maybe when it serves the purpose of the story, it doesn't bother me so much. But this one didn't really seem to serve the purpose, other than to show maybe like, the world was moving on, and here is this guy that was a hero one minute and is kind of forgotten the next. That's kind of one of those things that would resonate very well with what's it called, veterans of war, right? Like that storyline would probably resonate really well with audience that was in war and is maybe now retired, or just feels like the world is changing and maybe they're no longer heroes. Like that message would probably resonate pretty strongly with that group.
Well, look, it's essentially propaganda, isn't it? Like, this came out in 1943, still middle of World War II. A better way to sort of get people to rise up is to, put out a film about the past military successes and how even maybe a slightly embittered old man can still maybe get behind the military, even if it's kind of, I don't want to say, well, he's just, I don't know. This is kind of like a weird sort of deviation the way this film goes. Because normally with these kind of films, it will all be about the sort of, like you said, the rise to power, the rise to success. Whereas, Candy, this character, he just seems like a normal, just like it's just like one particular soldier. He's not particularly successful. He doesn't, go on to have a pivotal moment that shifts the war like these kind of films would have. They'd always put you with this guy who, whose idea it was to go after a certain strategy. It seems to be a normal guy for the most part, just sort of going through the motions of each war. And I suppose by showing him that at the end, even though he's sort of war torn and everything's kind of been taken from him, he's lost his home, his wife is dead. And even though he's a little bit bitter about how the German tactics are working, he still wants to fight the good fight, And this is that scene annoyed the fucking crap out of me. And you mentioned it earlier, Zach, how, maybe there's kind of like a bit of satire to this, but like that one scene takes all of that away. This whole
I will say
Britain wants to fight the good fight. It's like,
It does
Britain,
kill my point a little
I would
bit,
like to
'cause,
point you
you're
to
right.
every other fucking war you have fought. You know? And war, I'm using war as a generous term. Genocide and imperialism is probably a better term here, but yeah, this whole fight the good fight shit that annoyed the crap out of me, and that the film lost any shred of goodwill I had at that stage.
The film a little bit reminded me of, and I can't remember if either of y'all seen. I feel like y'all have Barry Lyndon.
Many years ago, but yes, I've seen it a long time ago.
Yeah, that whole idea, like, we're seeing this, of course there's the dueling aspect, which is, a big part of the first act of this film, and it's a big part of Barry Lyndon. But
Yeah.
like, we do follow the progression of like this life and everything else. I think the difference from watching it though, because that was the connection I was making in like the first, like Chris said, the first 90
I completely
minutes of the
agree.
film.
I got Lyndon vibes from it as well. Yeah, no, I completely agree.
I think with Lyndon, I think what ends up working better for it, and I think that might be what this film needed, was that almost like that bittersweet comedy to it, because like that's kind of how it ends. Like the idea you kind of get your comeuppance, but it works out in its own way, sort of idea. Like Barry Lyndon is more of a comedy than anything else in a lot of ways. If we're gonna, if we switch Kubrick's stuff into like comedies and not, but yeah, I feel like that's what I was kind of missing by the end of Colonel Blimp, that and the character Colonel Blimp, but could have
and
used
his death.
I kind of feel, talking to you, hearing you talk about Adam, I think a little bit of self-awareness could have really helped this film by the end.
Yeah.
So something you said, Adam, got me thinking a little bit. I don't know exactly, or maybe just this idea sparked as you were talking, but one of the things we haven't talked about yet is Deborah Kerr, right?
Mm.
And this was an unanswered question I had when I was going through it. This might be a good forum to figure this out. Like, I was trying to wrap my minds around why would Powell and Pressburger want to make this movie? Now, it could be that it was propaganda. Even Kurosawa, have y'all seen Kurosawa's propaganda movie?
No.
I'll find the name here in just a second, but it's nuts. Like about 45 minutes in or an hour in, there's a chant. Basically, it's like the only good British and Americans are dead British and Americans. It's crazy. For somebody who would later get financing from basically like Americans to finish his career. I don't think that was his view. I'm sure he just got hired on as, to make this film. So maybe Powell and Pressburger just got hired on to make this propaganda film. But I don't know if I'm totally satisfied by that explanation, because of all the characters that they aged meticulously, they never aged Deborah Kerr, right? They continued to make her character change in a very kind of unique way. Like, she was the most interesting part of the story for me, both because I think she nailed the scene she was in, but also because I don't quite know why they used her in the way that they did, and why they chose not to age somebody like the first iteration of her.
It's because she's awesome.
She is awesome.
That's fair.
Just reuse her. You're like, oh, we need it's gonna be 3 significant female characters. Who do we got? We have Deborah Kerr. Who else we got? We don't have anyone. Okay, well, let's just make Deborah all 3. Fuck it. No, I'm sure they had a much. Well, obviously, look, I think the whole idea is that each character is plays a significant part in Candy's life. Obviously, he was in love with her before she went off with Theo in her first iteration as Edith. In the second, obviously, he goes on to marry her. She was the nurse that was in the nunnery, and then obviously she's his driver then in the third iteration. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just not giving enough credit, or maybe I'm not reading into it correctly. But I just think it's double-edged in a way that you get to work with Deborah Kerr 3 times. You don't get to waste her, because with something like this, the way it's written, obviously, if they didn't recast her, you kind of waste her. She's only really in the film for the first 30 minutes, and then she's gone. And it's like, what was the point? Could have just hired anyone. So by getting to sort of cast her in 3 significant roles, you get to sort of show this sort of continuity between Candy. Even though he's getting older, he always still has, this particular woman by his side, even if she is sort of represented by different characters. But also at the same time, you get to work with Deborah Kerr throughout the whole film and have her play different roles and show different ranges. So I think it's a win-win situation for as far as Powell and Pressburger. But I'd be interested to see if they ever sort of acknowledge a reason behind it in an interview or a biography or anything like that, because I'm sure there's probably a much better explanation than why hire someone else when you can hire Deborah Kerr 3 times.
The casting agent just really wanted to take the day off.
Yeah, it's just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm done. I'm not casting any more people. Deborah's playing it. She's playing all 3.
Drop the mic.
May have had to convince the casting agent not to cast her as Candy as well. No, we can't do
that.
we can't get away with that now. I'm sure she'd kill it, but I don't think audiences would like it. So that's
the plot to. Have you all seen Adaptation?
No.
Oh, it's been a while, but I have.
That Nick Cage has. He plays himself and his brother.
Yeah.
And there's his brother is getting famous as a writer. It's kind of it's a real funny part of the story where his brother, who he plays the character of Charlie Kaufman, who was the name of the writer of the movie.
Yeah.
And his brother's name is Donald, and Donald's getting this notoriety as a screenwriter. And one of the first scripts he writes is about 3 people that are chasing each other. In the end, they wind up being the same person. That's the twist.
Anyway. Not to get too far off track on that, because I'm just sort of looking and realizing it. And I'm wondering if this was maybe a happy accident, because, as you guys know, I watched There'll Be Blood finally for the first time this week. And I was sort of reading into the background. And Paul Dano was originally hired just to play one of the Sunday brothers. And then they realized how great he was, so they just cast him as both of them. And I'm just wondering if that's literally what happened here, because this was, not only was this Powell and Pressburger's first major film, I'm pretty sure this was Deborah Kerr's first major film. I'm just getting her filmography up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is only her 3rd year working in film and only her 6th sort of acting role. So maybe, I've never heard of any of the films before or any of the directors before this film. So I'm wondering if this maybe was a Paul Dano happy accident where they auditioned her, they realized she was great and said, maybe let's have this idea of have her play all 3 characters to get this sort of cool continuity.
I mean, yeah, I could see that, especially I was going to say, during the war, you might be limited, but I guess not so much on women actresses necessarily. But I mean, when you're dealing with the war, I mean, you're probably on a limited amount anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well, no, unless we can find, obviously we're not going to do this now while we're talking because we could be here forever. But yeah, I'm going to maybe look a little bit deeper into it to see if it's ever mentioned in a biography or an interview or anything as a reason why she was cast in 3 separate roles, because it's an interesting creative choice you don't often see from this era of Hollywood,
right.
This era of filmmaking. It's an interesting creative choice, and I did enjoy her very much throughout the film, especially her last role. I liked her last role the best out of the 3, I think.
Johnny.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be. I think it's I'm fine stopping because we're not going to be able to figure it out just by guessing. But I want it to be something along the lines of showing, showing the extent to where this guy can't let go. Like he's got. Because he, throughout the movie, he talks about himself as all he knows is the military. It's that's what defines him. And so, some way to kind of illustrate that in his personal life, he really has nothing new that he did after essentially, 25 or whatever. It's all his whole life was just the first woman that he met was Edith, isn't that her name, right?
Yeah.
Edith, and then the military, and that's all he knows. Maybe as a commentary on getting stuck in the past or something, but. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I can see that for sure. That was essentially his first love along with the military. So by having, characters who look just like the woman he first fell in love with as a sort of metaphor for, like I said, not letting go or not moving on from, what he knows, then yeah, it tracks for me.
Yeah. I don't have that much else to say about this movie. I didn't love it. I love the first 90 minutes, but what are the other interesting tidbits here? What are the other interesting things about the film?
I'd like
Um,
to hear Adam talk about the animal heads.
I was going to bring that up. The animal heads for me are the perfect metaphor for British imperialism that I've ever seen in a film. Well, probably completely unintentionally. Because obviously back in the 40s, I'm sure they were all hunting all the time, in Africa and everything like that. You know, by having Candy, you know, go to Africa into these countries that they've taken over and whatever, and kill the native animals and hang them on his wall as decoration. I just couldn't see any better metaphor for the damage that British imperialism does than that. And Powell and Pressburger probably thought this is going to be a very cool transition. Hey, we're going to put the animal heads on. It's going to represent time passing. And and I'm thinking this is disgusting. This is abhorrent. You might as well just be putting the heads of Irish and American and fuck knows who else, Argentinian, whoever anyone else British has fought with over the centuries. You might as well be putting their heads on a wall rather than these animal heads.
You,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
was
it's
disgusted by it.
it's interesting. I watched The Naked Prey pretty recently, and
Hmm.
the interesting thing about that film, I won't go too far off track, but I want to say it's a British film. I want to say the guy who made it was, but I'm not going to swear to that. But the whole movie has the hero be this guy who basically takes like safari people out, and the whole movie has like this really graphic scenes of elephants getting shot repeatedly, like, and you're like, Jesus Christ. That's like, I guess that was just more okay at one time.
Well,
Oh,
to be fair, it was like I don't think I would be extremely shocked to learn that this was, a metaphor for the savageness of British imperialism because it would go against absolutely everything else that the film represents.
Hmm.
And obviously, like you said, I think it was just a thing at that time. People don't have as much love for conservation of wildlife as we do these days. Now you're seen as an absolute scumbag if you go out and shoot a lion or an elephant. You're the scum of the earth. Whereas I think in this time you were kind of it was something that wealthy people went and did, and it was like a sign of status or
yeah.
class, um, which doesn't is not a great image either if you're showing your main character as being in this kind of class. It doesn't really it's not really something that the
Well, just
ordinary
think
working
about how
class are going
rich
to
you
get
can be if
behind.
you're in the military.
That's true. Yeah, maybe
Uh,
maybe that's it. Yeah, yeah, that scene was disgusting, and I hated every moment of it. And I think it's no better scene has displayed the savageness of British imperialism than that scene.
All right. So I'm very excited to introduce Jason Oy, one of the founders of Crescendo House. Y'all hear in just a moment. His sincerity really shines through. I think I really love this interview. I feel like Jason is a very kind of authentic person who's doing this for it's a passion project for him. I think it's interesting that somebody who's had 4 careers by the time they're 23 has now settled down into publishing physical media, home media. Love that he's doing it without bias and without trying to sell for him. His release, the first release he did, is stunning. So if you get a chance, just go check it out. It's crescendo.house, and I think he's all the things that collectors look at for spine numbers and for the pay attention to the design on the packaging and special features. Everything is there, and it's a meticulous release. So very very excited for this interview, and hope he has a tremendous success in his label. Yeah. All right, so Jason Oy from Crescendo House, thank you so much for making some time for us today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So where am I speaking? Where are you today? Where am I speaking to you at today?
I am in California, Southern California, about an hour away from LA,
Okay.
my childhood bedroom.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
visiting for a little bit.
Okay, cool. And I'm in
Yeah.
Austin, so we're 2 hours apart here, not too far. Sister
Oh,
cities
cool.
to some cities in California, I guess.
Cool.
So Crescendo House has one release under the belt, which is coming out soon. And I know I got the email from y'all. I was an early pre-order, so I'm excited for that. And you have some other titles that you've announced for theatrical as well as for home video. Um, just to give a little bit of a background on Crescendo. So are y'all primarily going to be focusing on theatrical and home video? Are you going to be doing streaming as well? What kind of rights are you getting for these films?
So we're picking up, we're trying to get full rights when we can. And it's mainly kind of like an insurance thing. We want to be in control of how we release every movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times you see, for example, like, and with Labyrinth, I guess this would be a good example. We shared the streaming rights with Mubi. And so as a result, like we couldn't really test the kind of collapsed window model that we wanted to. But yeah, no, we generally want to be in control of like all the avenues of distribution. That said, we focus on theatrical and home video because those are kind of like the priorities, and those are what we know we can do well.
Yeah.
When it comes to streaming, I feel like, you know, unless you have a huge catalog, you're not really going to make an impact. And I think for us, streaming wise, the goal is to, you know, wait until we have a big enough catalog, maybe develop something, but probably not. More likely, we're trying to find good homes for our movies and sub-license the streaming rights out, maybe get an output deal. So yeah, like Labyrinth of Cinema, for example, we think would be great for Criterion, you know, Criterion channel, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, most importantly, we're just trying to find streaming companies that I think would do justice by the film, because I think, yeah, with streaming, it's, yeah, like this double-edged sword, right? And I think that not all, it's like you're buying into this algorithm that tells you which movie you're gonna like the most, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's feeding you kind of the stuff you're comfortable with. And I think, you know, like, well, I've seen my fair share of comfort films as well, and I am also prone to binging stuff. I think sometimes movies need to, you know, challenge you and take you out of that
Yeah.
comfort zone to really like share experiences and stuff. So,
We
yeah.
have a 4-year-old, and we all share the same Netflix account, and I can confirm that the algorithm has no idea what to tell us because every day it's totally different. No, I totally understand. And actually, I forget if it was in the earlier Reddit AMA or if it was in a separate interview I read, but you specifically, one of the goals of Crescendo is to get people into theaters, seeing these films that deserve to be seen in theaters, right? That's like a stated goal, right?
Yeah, because I think, so I guess like while I was researching for this, for the company, there are a lot of like alarming statistics when it comes to theatrical like audiences, like demographics.
Okay.
And I think it was something like the 2019 Art House Convergence, like they do like data sets for art house theaters.
Okay.
And it was something like of, you know, 500 theaters polled, 70% of audiences were over the age of 65 and 6% were under the age of 35. And I was like, that's why I don't have any friends my age, you know?
You're going to theaters.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, 99.9% of people are, you know, like white European. I'm like, but these are like Asian movies. Like these are like, you know, like European, like, or like these are like Latino movies. Like why aren't those audiences being represented? And I think ultimately I attribute it to like a lack of awareness, right? A lot of these movies, unless you're looking for them, you don't really know they exist. And I think the easiest way to kind of like put these movies out there, at least like, dude, go back to like when we were like growing up, right? The fastest way to like learn about a new director, a new filmmaker was you'd go to the theater to watch something else, and then you'd see a trailer for it, or you'd see like a poster for it, right? And so yeah, like the goal is to kind of yeah, put these movies out in the theatrical space, use home video as a means to that end. Because I think traditionally the windowing process for these kind of movies, you see this release schedule where you know, the theatrical release happens first, and it's LA and New York, and it never really does that well because it's only 2 theaters, and because, you know, profit margin wise, you're not going to spend that much on marketing for those 2 theaters. And I think like I was under the impression that a lot of these distribution companies kind of viewed that initial limited theatrical release as a marketing kind of publicity thing for the home video release. And so for me, it makes more sense to get rid of that geographical accessibility like clause, like the whole idea that, you know, growing up on the outskirts of LA where it would take me an hour to get to some of these theaters, I would always feel jealous about the people that would drive 10 minutes, right? Didn't have to go through the traffic. And yeah, like wanting to sell to the people that know about the director, know they're going to love the movie, kind of let them be passionate about it and create the buzz. And as a result, you know, like get the theatrical out, because those people, like, they're going to also be able to appreciate it in a theatrical setting. I think with Labyrinth, if you watch the movie like on movie streaming, like you're probably going to also want to watch it in theaters, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, like use the theatrical release as a centerpiece instead of as an introduction, um, so that yeah, people kind of, and yeah, like prove to exhibitors that there are people willing to, buy tickets for these kinds of things. Because I think ultimately it just comes down to like so many of these movies don't get theatrical releases. They only play in, the festival circuit. If you miss it there, you get to see it if you're in LA and New York. If you miss it there, like you're waiting for home video. And
Right.
yeah, why not have the theatrical be the centerpiece? Why not have people be able to experience it the way it was intended to by the directors, I guess?
And there's a more macroeconomic issue going on behind what you're saying, in that people are not necessarily, like film people are not necessarily centered in LA and New York anymore, because it's expensive to live in those cities. So they might actually be living in different places now. They may be living in like Omaha, Nebraska, or whatever, Chicago, Austin, where I'm like, you don't know that necessarily. But as you start getting, like I saw the R playing in Dallas. Most people don't know this about with Labyrinth. Most people don't know this about Dallas. Dallas has a huge film community for indie and art house. I went to school there in 2000 to 2005, and in those years, I mean university there, and in those years they had the most art house screens per capita in the country.
I didn't know that either. I always found it surprising, like with our theatrical run for Labyrinth, we got 16 or 15 cities now. But it's funny how we got 2 in Vancouver before 1 in Toronto, for example.
Oh yeah.
We got Tulsa, Oregon before we got like Miami or like Boston, right? Like Wisconsin before, like
Yeah.
Chicago. We got Chicago now, but there was a point. And yeah, it was like, I think there's a lot more flexibility with exhibitors now too, with theatrical settings. We're seeing a lot more like 3-day kind of like special event screenings, one screening every week, every day of the weekend, rather than like a full week run per se. But yeah, I think there are populations in America that aren't being tapped into, that have the potential to sell out these like, these theaters, that have the potential to like, yeah, prove the exhibitors that there's an audience for subtitles and there's an audience for longer movies if they're the right longer movies,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
And
So
people
yeah,
may want to see a follow-up film from the director of House if they haven't seen anything else by that guy, because who wouldn't want to see something else but this guy?
yeah, he made 60 something movies in his career and only
Right.
one ever got picked up for US distribution.
Yeah.
That has since changed. Kim Stim got the his War trilogy and we're doing Labyrinth. But it's like, yeah, for the longest time, Obayashi was like this really great director. It's like, oh yeah, what did he do? House.
Right.
And it's like, he has a huge catalog of things that all kind of live up to that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and some of them that are even, like more in depth and personal and intimate and weird even. And it was just
Like,
such a shame to see these like disappear, go
it's
off
like
the
saying
radar.
David Lynch did Dune or something, right? You're like, that's true, but there's a lot more to David Lynch.
Yeah. Yeah, he
Um,
did that he did Dune and he did that Eraser movie that looked weird, so I didn't go see it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, specifically on home video, you have also stated that you're going to focus on steelbooks. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we're actually working on like a proprietary system right now just to see if we can change it up a little bit. Because I
Right.
think the problem with our steelbook release was that we had to do a minimum order quantity of like 4,000, and that was like a really high number, especially for like a starting out company, right? Like a company just starting, and especially
Uh-huh.
for some of these movies that we're putting out in the future. So the other 2 directors that we have films of in our catalog have never been distributed in America before, I think apart from streaming. So we have Julian Rademeyer, his second movie. We picked up his first one along to go with it. And we have Zhang Lu, who's also been working in the industry for decades. He's
Mhm.
been basically like confined to the festival circuit, right? And he's like the only, I think, trilingual director I can really think of off the top of my head. His movies are about like Chinese and Korean tourists in Japan usually.
Wow.
Um, and he himself is a Chinese Korean director. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, like I think for those movies, we don't want to put too much pressure on them, and we also do want to continue to like innovate. And there are these massive supply chain shortages. We have had these delays with our release, and it's literally just a matter of like, I've spent too much time on the phone with FedEx trying to like find lost packages and stuff.
Mm.
But yeah, like the supply chain and like getting everything together for this release, too many moving parts, and part of me thinks that if this like new system works really well, if it looks good and if it is more sustainable, then, and it lets us, if it lets us to lower order quantities and make it more limited, I think that would be good. But yeah, we're still thinking on that.
Well, I hope I mean, there's innovation is always fun, right? And I think that there's a thirst for, one of the companies that comes to mind is Cauldron Films, the guy that has Diabolic DVD, broke off.
Jesse, I love that guy.
Yeah. So he did something kind of cool, which is that he put out a limited slipcover, right? And then he put out like a VHS packaging, and then he put out a standard release. So there's like variation even within the titles, right? And different companies like Vinegar Syndrome is trying that archive line where they slip down from the bottom, and you see, like, my point is, like, you see these different styles of innovation, and I think, I don't know if you experience this. You mentioned that you're active on Boutique Blu-ray, at least as a lurker, and so you probably see this as well. But like, I've been collecting since 2001, give or take, 2000, 2001. So I saw that first wave when limited editions were like 50,000. Then it kind of died down a little bit, and then it's picking back up again to where 4,000 might not actually be that high. I mean, once word starts getting out about a brand and people want to see stuff from Crescendo House, like 4,000 might actually sell out, right? I feel like that's kind of on the upswing again, I guess.
And I think that was the goal initially. The reason we put home video first, one of the other reasons is that we started out with like no money. And so we straight up did this with, I think, 20 grand in the bank to begin with. And we got all the titles, and we like did all the manufacturer home video stuff. And for us at that point in time, it was like, oh, we'll let the interest drive the marketing for theatrical, right? Say if we sell 2,000 copies of the 4,000, we're up about 140 grand. And that's money that we can then funnel into the marketing for the theatrical release, right? Like,
yeah.
And the other thing was like, oh, and if we sell out, we can prove to exhibitors that, there is so much interest that, like more people, but I think, we don't need to talk about that too much at this point. But yeah, it was a means to an end to begin with, but also, like I've been collecting since I was maybe 13, 14. And I would like save up my lunch money, and I would go to like Barnes and Noble during the like 50% off sale. And
that's awesome.
I remember there was like a point in time where I just had no room for books left on my bookshelf, and I was like taking books out and putting like Blu-rays in.
That's great.
But yeah, I mostly lurk on those subs nowadays because I don't know, social media has always been kind of intimidating for me. I like talking to people like face to face. I like being able to see them, and I think there's always that like room for miscommunication, and that's like a slippery slope. And so I love seeing people with their pickups and stuff, and I love seeing like what's coming out in the markets. I love seeing like all these creative ways that people like photograph their products. It's like insane, right?
Well, that actually might be a good segue into you, because you might be the most interesting man in distribution, because you're, as opposed to having a career that's just like maybe starting off in kind of a entry-level job in Kino and then working your way up to eventually releasing a product. You've actually already had a couple of careers at 23, right? Can you talk just a little bit about like your life? And I just think it's interesting for people to know this, because you're even streaming like on as a gamer for a while, right?
Oh yeah. Okay. So like, it was never like full careers. So I always feel like a little bit like asterisk on that. I just have a very like, I guess, I wouldn't say short attention span, but like, I don't know. I feel like, I love working in film, and I love that my hobby is like also my profession. And sometimes I get like idle hands, and I just want to like try things, right? I like, like challenging myself to like try new things. So like when I first started out, this was even before I got into movies. I was really into video games, because what kid isn't?
Right. Amazing. Right.
Yeah, and I have like a very obsessive personality, I guess. So I would spend way too much time on that. And then I remember like I was getting too toxic, man, because I was playing these like team-based games, and I was like yelling at teammates, and I was like, I'm not that kind of guy. I don't want to be that kind of person. So I like, I don't know. I remember, I think it was like Reservoir Dogs was like my awakening. It was just like ironic, but it was, I remember like somebody recommended that to me. I watched it, and then every day for like the next like 6 years, I like made it a point to watch something as soon as I got home from school.
Oh, wow.
And then there were like 3 years in which I was watching 3 movies a day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there was like that going on. I grew up in a city where it was like, yeah, we have like, one of the most, I would say, well regarded like public high schools in America.
Okay.
And so you have to like test in and everything. There was even like a book written about my high school about like how, oh yes, I saw fucking 15-year-old girls with white hairs from stress, right? Because it was like high pressure, kind of like everyone's
Wow.
gonna be a lawyer, a doctor, a programmer, they're gonna contribute something to society.
Mhm.
And I was like the only person in my class that was like, yeah, I want to watch movies all day and talk about like art and my feelings. And I felt really alienated, because a lot of people didn't take that kind of stuff seriously.
Right.
And so I got into criticism because I was always like, I always thought of myself as like a, better than average writer. Um, and I wanted to kind of like write with the perspective of like, I'm trying to convince people to watch these movies that I care about. So I made it like a rule to like, I mostly was able to follow. There were some periods where I had to review like some like lesser known stuff for bigger publications, but to write about movies that I really cared about that I didn't think was getting enough attention,
Yeah.
as well as directors that I loved that people wouldn't otherwise review. So I did a lot of documentaries, did a lot of experimental stuff, a lot of international. And so that was like to kind of figure out how I could convince people to watch more movies. I think that's always been like my life goal, like ever since I got into film. So like after that, when I went to college, I did programming for a little bit, mostly freelance, but I ran like a 16 millimeter film club at NYU. I was doing like the projection myself. I was handling and restoring like, the reels that we had. And I remember, like I would program weird shit and people would call us out for it sometimes. And that ultimately led to us getting canceled. Um,
I
but
love it.
I don't know. I'm not that interesting. I think I'm just like young and over my head, I think for the most part, because I think I do kind of, I did a film festival as well. When COVID started, because I was like applying for jobs left and right. And I was like, oh, the natural progression of like programming is like, there's a lockdown now, so let's do like an online film festival for
Yeah.
quarantine. It was called the Long Distance Film Festival. And it started out as like a COVID film fest, but we got so many admissions because we wanted it to be free and we wanted to see what people were working on. And then we realized that a lot of the kind of like COVID projects weren't going to age very well, but the ones that were good were really good.
Ooh.
And I'm really proud of that because even though we made like no money, we got to screen 50 something movies from 30 countries. And we did 3 blocks of programming and we did it all on Twitch live. And our kind of like mentality when we came to like sequencing the films was, one, it was cool because it was cool to see people that would otherwise have to collaborate and like, maybe compromise their like voice, do these like, movies about these things that they were feeling and have it be like 100% them, right? Them writing, editing, directing, doing the DP work.
Yeah.
But like the other rule that we made was like no 2 films in a row can be alike. And so it was really cool. We played like, oh, it's like, oh, here's like, your traditional high school like romance short film. And then here's a dance video, and here's an essay film, and here's an experimental like Flickr film.
Okay.
And it was so cool seeing the people react to it live in the chat and just like freak out with the movies, like
Super interesting. I've always wondered if there could be a way, I don't want to go too far down this path because this is a different discussion, but I've always wondered if there's a way that Twitch could be used to show behind the scenes of filmmaking. I think people would be interested in seeing like how film was actually made live, even though that sounds boring.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think like the big pitfall with that is that, one, it's like how much content you're really going to have to be able to consistently draw in like an audience like that. And two, like, dude, the legal stuff, like, because we kind of ran like a guerrilla operation, because, you use a piece of music in a movie, you got to get insured for it. And that's like something that I didn't know going into this too, was that like, for example, sometimes you'll buy movies from sales agents, or like you'll buy these like finished movies from like well-known directors, or like you'll look into them and you'll realize that like, oh yeah, some of the rights that they had licensed don't actually apply in your country. And so like if you want to, get the rights for that, you got to pay a huge chunk, like they use a Springsteen song, you're fucked. Like that kind of thing.
Interesting.
So, yeah, like,
that was a big problem with the Wonder Years release. That held up the DVD release for like 10 years because nobody would pay the music rights. I just remember that from back in the day.
yeah, and I think with Evangelion, where they're like, yeah, we're not going to use the Springsteen track. It's like, wait, that's like iconic.
Right. Wow. So basically, I guess to summarize, you're kind of an entrepreneur at spirit, right? And this, you always sort of done these entrepreneurial things where you haven't asked for permission. You've kind of just like gone and done them.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I try to be as careful as I can. I wouldn't really call myself an entrepreneur. I think maybe like if this company does well, but I guess my dad was an entrepreneur. I call him an entrepreneur. And I was always afraid of kind of like doing like running a business from scratch just because we had these periods of like economic, instability growing up. Where it'd be like, oh yeah, we can live it up, lower middle class, and then all of a sudden we're like broke, and then all of a sudden we're back.
Yeah.
So I remember always thinking like I would do logistics with him. I would do like I'd work at the warehouse with him because he's like a little bit older. So I remember, yeah, as a kid helping him out and being like, holy shit, like I never want to do this. And
Well,
then like realizing that I had kind of made that promise to myself like 3 months into this, where I was like, oh yeah, this is really difficult. And this is why, and I knew this was coming, but I was kind of just like blinded by the excitement of being able to release some of these movies.
I mean, that's the appeal of entrepreneurship, right? Is that it's you get sucked into the promise of it, right? You get the dream is alive, right?
Yeah, gotta
Um,
keep the dream alive, man. But oh my God, like I would be so happy to take orders from people right now, like to just like start the day and have like an agenda and like finish it, and like move on and have a life outside of work. Because yeah, no, since we started this company, I think we did kind of go into it a bit too like haphazardly, like maybe a little bit too overambitious. But yeah, like dude, I've not slept more than like 4 hours a night since this has started, like a
oof.
year ago almost. And
Well,
it's starting to like hit me.
so I don't want to, again, I guess this is just personal for me because I was an entrepreneur from 2011 to 2019. I did my own work. So I can tell you that like there are things you learn in that process to where it's a little bit easier the second time, right?
Yeah.
Like the
And part of
second
me
release.
wishes
Mhm.
that like I could start over from scratch and just like refresh the slate because I've like learned the team has learned so much these past few months,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like there's this pressure, I guess, where I don't know, because we are releasing like one movie at a time, right? It's again double-edged sword, I guess. We have the flexibility to kind of release these movies how we want to, and we have that control. And I know there's like less pressure on us than there is on like the big company that's expected to make like millions in revenue and stuff. But at the same time, like with Labyrinth of Cinema, man, I kept thinking, like I would stay up at night like thinking like, oh God, if we screw this up, like that's a man's legacy we're fucking up. And like with Julian's film, Bloodsuckers, it's like, yo, that's like his introduction to America. Like we're handling that, and if we fuck it up, like, oh no, like he's gonna really have to work hard to like make it up. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I guess like the pressure of dealing with other people's like works of art, like these intimate creations
Yeah.
made by these like filmmakers, like, yeah, I know sometimes I'm like, we're not worthy, but yeah,
It's
trying
but
to,
I can tell you there's something you said on the AMA which really struck me, which is that Obayashi's the late Obayashi, his living wife, met with an interpreter that she already knew and conducted an interview for the release, right? And I guarantee you that that experience for her was something that she probably needed. Like that was probably cathartic for her to talk about her husband and see it through the eyes of like this, with all due respect, like this young kid, right? Who's coming over, who's like in awe of Obayashi. And she saw that, she got to see that through that. I can tell you, I'm almost 40 now. I think I would just challenge that perspective just a little bit. And I can say the fact that you're putting this like time and care into it, that is noticed by these filmmakers. Like that's not lost on them. And I don't think that like production delays or like slight subtitling issues or whatever, like the nuance that matters so much to you because you want to get the release perfect. I think that people that create these things actually see the heart behind it. And I think that matters a lot.
yeah, I hope they do, because yeah, we're trying our hardest, but yeah, it's like the public facing side, we can't always kind of like, I don't know, I don't really talk about my age as often because I don't want people thinking like, oh, like we're gonna let him off easy because he's younger. I've never wanted to kind of be interpreted as different from like anybody else doing the same thing, right? And I've never really viewed age as like that kind of obstacle. But yeah, no, like that interview was heartbreaking, man. It's so good. It was like melancholic, I would say, because
Yeah.
yeah, it did feel cathartic. Like she's like laughing through tears, and I remember this one part she talks about how like early on in their career, Obayashi asks her like if she's gonna be okay dating a starving artist, and she goes like, I remember what I said. I was like, oh yeah, if you ever make a boring movie though, it's done, you know? It's like as long as you keep
like the
making weird shit.
relationships then.
Yeah, it's like if you keep making boring movies, I'm not going to support you anymore. But as long as you keep doing you, like I'm in your corner. And
Oh,
yeah, she produced like I think she was like a costume designer on the early ones, and she produced all the other ones. And yeah, I remember like Labyrinth of Cinema for us was we had tried to get like three other titles in that time. Um, maybe even, bigger properties in America, but like in the end, it was always down to like the producers to make a decision. And it was always like, we're going to take the higher money from like the larger amount of money from the company that has proven that they can do this already.
okay.
Right. Which is totally fair because honestly, I wouldn't have trusted myself back then. But I remember like emailing them about Labyrinth of Cinema, like only having read the summary. Right. Um, and then watching it and being like, holy shit, like this is everything that I wanted to say in that email, that like of like what I wanted to accomplish with this company, like manifested in this vision from this, like, I don't know, I always viewed, I'm like kind of like an optimistic, like pessimist, I guess. I don't know, because I'm aware of all of the facts stating the contrary, but I still want to believe that things can be changed, right?
Yeah.
And it was crazy because like somebody like Obayashi on his deathbed, like basically directing this movie that he never should have been able to make because he thought the War trilogy would be his last, and being able to do that with the optimism that is present in that movie, man, like with that belief in like future generations, with that belief in us, like it literally opens with like, we're here for world peace, like this movie, we're going to try and go for world peace. It's like, yo, like I loved seeing that. It was like, yeah, the same kind of like ambitious filmmaking. It's weird and it's different, but it might just fucking work, because of that. I
I
don't
love that.
know. I want to, yeah, like it's like, yo, politicians should watch this shit, like just to
You
see
said
the
that you give it
impact.
to him for free, right? Any world leader that
Yeah,
wants to watch it.
yeah, it's yeah, man. Oof.
I was struck at the way you described and that just now reminds me of listening to the commentaries. So I've been going through Jodorowsky's films for the first time. I'd never seen a lot of the famous films that he produced, and
He's
the way that,
passionate.
oh my gosh, and he's
Yeah.
an optimist. Like he's a good, like his movies are famous for kind of having it's like animal cruelty and like shocking imagery and whatever. But when he's talking, like he's purposely being provocative, but he's really like focused on the message of these movies, and like he's trying to change the world. He's trying to get people to like a spiritual transcendence. He's trying to get people to like freedom. Like he's pushing, like he's really like he's a super optimistic, like well balanced. Like in Santa Sangre, the commentary, he's openly talking about this is the first time he's seen the death of his son. And he's like, I thought this was going to be a much harder experience for me, but this is actually very cathartic. Like he's this open, like emotional person. I was like, man, this guy's awesome. Like I want to support this art, right? Because this guy is like really a positive force.
Yeah. Oh my God. I remember I like first week at NYU, I dragged my roommates. They were I think one of them was like a physics guy, one of them was like one of them was a film student, and one of them was like a math guy. And I dragged them all to go see like El Topo at midnight. It was like, hey guys, like we're gonna be living together. So like here's like the kind of
Me.
stuff I'm into. I
uh-huh.
was like, yeah, here's like a guy with no arms tied to a guy with no legs.
Uh-huh.
They're one person. And I remember they were like so weirded out for it, starting out. And then they left the theater. They're like, I've never seen anything like that before. I think I liked it. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, man. That's the reaction. It's like you got to think about it a little, you can't just like rush into your feelings. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
he's so passionate, and his movies are like accessible in that kind of way as well, where I think you kind of see through the passion, and you like you see the passion and you see what they're trying to do, and it makes the stuff that makes you a little bit more uncomfortable like more easy to kind of understand. And I think it really creates like that sense of empathy, right? I think that's what like these kind of movies are the greatest for, right?
So this kind of ties into one of the questions I had as I was thinking about what I wanted to ask you. So It sounds like the way, again, just kind of as I was getting to know you through reading about you, now I'm actually talking to you, but it sounded like you enjoyed experimental filmmaking or films that kind of pushed on the boundaries of the common kind of rhythms of film or the boundaries of film. So what is it that draws you to that way of storytelling?
Oh man, I think one is just like the sensory inputs,
Okay.
right? There's like a feeling, right? I don't know, you watch like I don't wanna talk too much shit on Marvel, but like you watch a Marvel movie and like do you ever get goosebumps anymore? Right? Like not
Yeah,
too
yeah.
often.
No, you're
Like
right. Yeah, yeah.
um but you watch some of like I remember the one paper I ever got published in academia was about like the effects of flicker films, right? It's this like really small subgenre of like structural filmmaking. And it's basically just like binary almost. It's like ones and zeros. It's like the light is on, the projector light is off, right? So like the most famous ones are by like Paul Sharits. And it's like, yeah, like a flickering light. You're watching this flickering light for like 10 minutes, right?
Okay.
And I remember I was like researching that and just reading about like, you know, these like testimonials of people coming at the screen telling, yo, it was like out of body experience. Like, you know, some people are like, yo, like it was like, you know, like being on shrooms or something. And I remember thinking like, yo, if a movie, if like the series of images, right, or like, you know, light even can like stimulate those parts of your brain and make you feel certain ways, like, you know, like that's something special. Um, and I feel the same way for, yeah, anything that really surprises you, that catches you off guard. Because I don't know, yeah, I remember having the realization that my guilty pleasure is like sci-fi, right?
Okay.
And I remember having this realization. So whenever I'm like a little bit bummed, I'll put on like a sci-fi movie and just
Okay.
like feel it, right? And having the feeling that, oh man, I've seen about every sci-fi blockbuster that's ever been out, you know? Because there
Uh-huh.
aren't that many. They're expensive to make, right?
Sure, sure.
And yeah, like just like working through like the various genres like that of like mainstream kind of like filmmaking and running out of content almost and seeing a lot of the same kind of like patterns or trends or like, you know, there's some things I like, some things I don't like, but like being able to kind of like or like sorry unwittingly turning my brain off during some of these movies just
Mhm.
because you know I see these like same patterns. And so whenever I do see like a movie that does attempt something different, you know, you got to give it props for that because it'll catch you off guard, it'll like push you awake. And it's like a joke in the company that like with me and the one other employee that we have of like, you know, the
Uh-huh.
best movies are the ones that have like 60% on Rotten Tomatoes. You know, the best movies
Yeah.
are the ones that like half the people hate, half the people love, right?
Right, right, right.
Because yeah, like I mentioned, I do think movies should, you know, elicit a reaction. And I think hate is as strong as a reaction as love. And I think like, you know, there's a reason for all of that. And I think the movies that do break these like formulas, like, do you remember that like vulgar tourism thing? How like, you heard of that?
I don't know by name. Tell maybe like what's an example of it? Maybe I know by some of the
Like
product.
Paul W.S. Anderson,
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure, sure, sure.
how there are like waves of people that will like, I don't like that they call it that because it implies that it's like anything but regular tourism.
Uh-huh.
But like the notion that like, yeah, like here are these movies that everyone kind of, that the mainstream, you know, commercial like has kind of disregarded as like, you know, mindless entertainment. But then
Mhm.
you watch like Resident Evil 5 and that whole movie is like a simulation in a simulation. And it's like, what the fuck, right? Like
Uh-huh.
you could write a 30-page paper on that, like just the
Uh-huh.
things that it brings to mind. And then like you get to like Resident Evil 6 where like there's an edit every other frame in some shots. I think the editor is Doobie White, and he has this style where it's like, you know, a lot of the reviews are like, oh, it's incoherent. And I was like, I didn't think so. I thought it was like kind of refreshing how like they made that work, right? Like, you know, how people always make fun of like in Taken 3, how it takes like 70 cuts for him to jump over that fence or something.
Okay, yeah, 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 yeah.
And it's like, yeah, and that is like not good because you can't really tell what's happening and you can tell that it's like a waste of space. But when you see that kind of happen, right, in like Resident Evil, the final chapter, right, it's like a shot of a foot in the air, a shot of somebody like going back, and a shot of like of somebody like falling backwards, and then a shot of like her unholstering a gun. And that's all within like a split millisecond. And it makes sense, you know, it makes sense montage wise. Yeah, I love that shit. I love when movies try stuff that's different. I love when they experiment. I love when they aren't afraid to take risks, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I always wish that sometimes, like, I feel like critics should wait a little bit longer before writing a review. But that's the nature of the world we live in, you know?
I mean, the classic example of that is Night of the Hunter getting panned when it first came out, right? And now you look at it and you're like, who would ever possibly write a negative review of this movie? It's like incredible on every level. Like what?
What was the rationale for that again? It was like,
I think it was just different, right? Like we did one of the earlier, we spent about 20 minutes trying to figure out that exact question, like why? But I think it was just, we looked at the other films from that year and it was like kind of a time in American film history where it was like bland, star-driven vehicles that were like very predictable. And then out of nowhere, it was like right after the war. So people wanted like good stories. And then like out of nowhere comes this dark, dark, dark story. And like with shadows and angles and like larger than life perspective and like these crazy things that go on. And I think they just maybe it's just a timing issue. Because who could possibly watch that and not love it? Like it's such an amazing, anyways. So speaking of taking risks, I guess that's might be a good segue into one of the questions I had, because I'm curious about something, and maybe this is me reading into something that you had no intention of, but I'm just curious. You talk about reimagining distribution, right? And I love that as an audacious goal. Like I love big goals like that, right? This is another reason I think you have an entrepreneurial spirit, even if you don't like to call it that, because this is what tech startups do. Right, that's been the world. That's the world I come from. They want to change the world somehow, right? And so you're kind of approaching it in the same way that, like, if you look at an early deck from PayPal, they didn't talk about like this thing that lets you change. They wanted to redefine currency, right? Like it's these big, like audacious goals, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, what are the current distribution houses doing wrong that you think needs to be tweaked, or am I reading your statement the wrong way?
All right, this is a tough one, but let me give it a shot. I guess what I'm saying by that, I'm not really saying that like distribution companies are really doing anything wrong per se. I think that there is a kind of, there is like we're releasing one title right now, right? And I am like so overworked that I am like going crazy. And I could not imagine having the pressure of like putting out 10 titles, you know, like something like that, right? So I think that what we have for now is the kind of flexibility to try something different. And, you know, it was ambitious at first, especially, although like I do feel like maybe a bigger company should try. I think that, you know, some bigger companies are. For example, like you look at like Neon and Say What You Will, they're trying, you know, different release models, right? With like Memoria, like that's kind of a collapsed window, right? Like system. Or like even just like the day and date trends, right? Like I think that's probably the biggest shakeup. And the only reason that that was pushed through was because, you know, the companies had the leverage, right? And so I think that the problem is that none of the big companies that do handle like international distribution, these kind of movies like this, may or may not, I don't really know, I don't want to speak for them, but have the ability to like take these kinds of risks, whereas we can, you know, because we are one title at a time. They have our utmost focus. And so I guess what I was trying to like accomplish with the company is kind of like prove people wrong, prove to people that like a different windowing system like home video first, for example, can work. I think the only reason it doesn't work is because people are caught up in the traditions of the system. And for the most part, I think most distributors, if it made sense, they would do it. It's just a matter of like, there's not enough commitment from all of the industries, because for something like what we're trying to accomplish to work on a large scale, you need to have everybody kind of working together, right? You need like the exhibitors to also be down with this. You need the critics to also be willing to adjust how they review movies and like the timelines in which they put them out. So it needs to be like a concentrated effort. And so like, for example, we get some pushback these days, like the early on where it was like a lot of theaters, hey, we want to play the movie, but you know, you already have the home video release. And I'm like, well, what's limited edition 4,000 home video copies at the most, right? Maximum, versus like say for Black Widow, 45 million streams gone, right?
Okay. Right.
It's like, why do you have a problem with the 4,000 home video release?
I see.
That's priced really high, you know?
I see what you're saying. Okay. So when you get deep into the industry, you're saying that there's some fundamental. So if we're building software, there's this like concept of technical debt, right? It's hard to build new software because old software was coded in a way that makes it difficult to add on to it, right? And so I guess what you're saying is like, you're entering into a system that's well established and it's hard to adjust and kind of pivot to the way that people are consuming movies now. And so you're coming in and saying, hey, there's a better way that's more efficient in getting content out. And that's why you talk about geography then, because there's these people that want to see it in Des Moines or like in like, you know, Boise, and like they might not get a theatrical release, but they get the option of buying the home video. But then for the markets that can support a theatrical release, they're getting it, and these are happening in conjunction, but they're actually not competing with each other. So you're asking people to like broaden the way they think about this.
Yeah, because I don't think it's like that big of a stretch to say that, like, you know, some of the people that are going to buy in early to these, you know, blind buy these home video products, like that they might also be, you know, enticed to watch it in theaters or write about it. Yeah. Like the people that have been the most supportive online for us have all already seen the movie, you know? They caught it in festivals, they caught it at, you know, like these one-off like virtual screenings. And yet they're still helping us support, like they're still helping support our theatrical run. And I love that, because that's exactly what I was like, the reaction I was hoping for from, like, you know, these people that otherwise wouldn't have a chance to talk about, you know, like these movies in that way. Or
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Jason, I could, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I could talk to you all day. I know we requested a certain amount of time from you. You know, would you be open to maybe, you know, after the release is out, or maybe in a year, if you got a couple of releases under your belt, would you be open to kind of coming back and seeing how it's going and just doing a check-in?
Yeah, I can answer like another one or two if you got, but yeah, no, I'd definitely be down. This is fun.
Super fun. Yeah, I mean, the biggest question I think that I'm curious about personally is, you mentioned that you have a little bit of an obsessive personality. So do I. That's why I collect. That's one of the ways that I get to tap into that. Are you a collector as well?
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna fucking, this is like half of my collection from like when I was in high school. And then I have like the rest of it in New York at my girlfriend's place. Nice. It's like taking up space right now. Yeah, we're
so I know,
move right now.
I know you don't have any time because you're only sleeping 4 hours a day. After you get through the thick of it and you do have some time on your hands, you do have a chance to relax. I guess you already mentioned this. Your go-to is sci-fi when you want to relax. Is that it? Is that what you do to relax?
Oh yeah, man. I smoke a fuck ton of pot and I watch sci-fi movies.
That's great. What's a movie that you love that you have to defend because most people don't like it?
Oh my God, there's so many of these. Let me think. Yeah, we got like the Resident Evil ones. I'm always like in that corner. I think one of the best movies, this isn't sci-fi, but I think one of the best movies that's ever come out like in my lifespan is fucking Tony Scott's Unstoppable, dude.
All right. Like, okay.
That is a fucking goat movie. Like that movie understands time, it understands pacing, and it has this like subtext of like pain, right? Of like this deep, like suppressed pain. And that shit gets me, man.
I'll have to watch it. I'll put that on my watch list tonight.
Oh, I think I've been watching like the Universal Soldier movies recently. I think the John Hamm ones are really good, man. I think those are special.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then the ones I always go back to. Oh, one that I remember defending a lot, like it was like 2 years ago now. That was the year where I was still working as a critic in 2019, and I remember that was the year where I was like, fuck it, you know, I'm just gonna talk about the movies that I like, no matter how they make me look. And so I remember in my top 10 list for the film stage, I put like Gemini Man and like Alita in like the top 4 or something.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, these are just great fucking movies that like use technology in different ways, and they're weird and they're alienating, and I think that's the point.
Okay.
And that one I remember like had a lot of people like, judging. Oh, I once tried to do a presentation. I once tried to present an academic paper I'd written on Ready Player One at like a conference, and they had accepted it, and then they were like, never mind.
I hate that though, man. Like there is, so if you think about like these movies that have been like watered down or made for the masses or whatever, there's still people with passion that are in that, right? And I think if you look at like movie is not one thing, but like a kind of a sum of like all a bunch of individual parts. There are still individual parts within any film that are worth kind of calling out, right? And worth enjoying. It's sad that people can't see that. I totally, so this is a weird example, but I'm just with my 4-year-old, I'm going through the Gamera movies.
Oh, are those the weird, like the 50s, like Japanese ones?
Yeah, so it's like the kind of the some of like the ones that are made right after Godzilla was so successful, so they tried to think of like another monster movie to create. So I take it you haven't seen them yet, is that right?
I haven't. Is that the one
Okay.
with the monsters like a terracotta, like cute? Oh wait, no, that's not it,
No, he's a
right?
turtle. He's a turtle, and
Oh
he has
yeah.
these
Okay.
tusks, and he breathes fire, and he spins around like a top, right? But in the second one, he's wild, right? But in the second movie, that's how far I'm in the series. The bad guy, I guess, is this guy called Barugan, and he shoots rainbows out of the back of his spine, and the rainbows blow up tanks and like destroy cities. And his
That's
tongue is
sick.
it's like this extremely phallic image of like this tongue like shooting out of his mouth and spewing ice, and it freezes cities and stuff. And I'm like, this is insane. I love this. Like this movie is
Yeah. It's like
anyway,
the amount of like stuff you could get away with. How
right?
does your kid like it?
He doesn't fully understand like that's a phallic thing or whatever he's for, but like he just loves it. He's just like, wow, that lizard like shoots ice. That's awesome. But
Oh man, I would be really curious. Have you seen Labyrinth yet?
no, honestly I'm waiting for the release. I can't wait to see it though.
Yeah, I'm like part of me wants to ask you to like expose your kid to that shit because that's like a movie that I feel like was made for like, children, but I'm like a little bit upset about this. Like some of our screenings are like since we're unrated, some of the theaters have put like age caps or like
Oh,
the way
interesting.
it's described is like, yeah, 18 plus because there's some weird like political imagery going on. But I think like overall, it is a movie that would kind of appeal to children. And I remember thinking like, it's kind of like talking. The narrator is kind of like speaking to the younger generations, And I love the opening scene. Some like one of the of everyone piling into the movie theater. There's like this one like cutaway shot where a kid goes like, "Oh, are we watching anime?" And the dad's like, "No, we're watching film."
Oh wow, nice, so nice, nice, nice. I'll
Yeah,
tell you. I mean, I'll watch it with him. If that's fine. I'll tell you how he reacts. Um,
yeah,
well,
maybe. I don't know if it's a good. I think it is, but I'm
I'll watch it
blinded
first.
by.
I'll watch it first and
Yeah.
make sure, and then I'll tell you. Let's see if you watched it. But look, man, all the best on getting through these production delays. Can't wait to champion you on. Can't wait till the second one goes up for pre-order. You'll have a day one pre-order from me, and this will get pushed on Reddit, so the boutique Blu-ray community is gonna know we spoke and hopefully help you sell out. We want to have some good stories to tell here from Labyrinth. So thanks so much for making some time.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, theatrical release next week. Playing 15 theaters. Info on the website. Check it out. I'm gonna rep that. And yeah,
Perfect.
thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, man. I look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, and welcome back. Now we're going to be talking about Nightmare Alley, not the Guillermo del Toro one that's coming out later this month, but the 1947 by Edmund Goulding, which is about Stanton Carlyle joins a Cine carnival working with Mademoiselle Zena and her alcoholic husband Pete. So I will hear from Chris. What do you think?
It's not interesting if I'm on mute. Sorry about that. I don't know how that happened. So okay, by They Shoot Pictures that puts this at 2,500,
Too low.
which to me feels way too low. Yeah, I
What
agree.
was the figure? Sorry, I just missed it.
2,500.
Yeah, that's low. That's definitely low. This should be like top 1,500 at least.
Yeah, I would have liked to see it there. It's got, especially when you start looking at the movies that are kind of in that 2,500 range. Pitt Moldovar's "Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down" is up there. True Stories from David
Shut your
Byrne is
poor
up there.
mouth about tie me up, tie me down.
Uh-huh. Yeah, like it's, I don't know, whatever. It's Knocked Up from Judd Apatow is right next to it. So yeah,
Random.
I think this is, yeah, super random. Okay, I love this movie a lot. I think it was, we were talking, I was thinking a little bit about a conversation when we were trying to unpack the couple in La Delante, and we were talking about like the point is that it wasn't a good relationship. Like not all relationships are good, that's okay. Like this was a depiction of an imperfect romance kind of.
Mhm.
And I thought about that when I was watching Nightmare Alley, because this is a brilliant depiction of a guy that just falls apart. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I should ask y'all, how do we want to talk about this movie without bringing in spoilers? Or what level, where do we want to say it's spoiler
Yeah,
versus not spoiler?
yeah. I think this could be going into spoiler territory as it is. I think anything that happens in like the final 45 minutes, we'll leave and then we'll talk about that a little later. We'll do a big spoiler warning. So
Okay.
let's talk about how he gets into the situation before where the main plot kicks in.
I don't know which part was my favorite. I love the first part. Watching this guy rise up. It reminded me of sort of an artistic or an art house version of what's that one called? Now you see me. The one called
Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, something like that type of film. There was even one with oh shoot, the professional. No, not the professional. That's different. Anyways, there's been a few of these films made over the last 20 years that have to do with either a mentalist or magicians or like people that kind of can manipulate an audience. And I think this was up there with the best of any of them. That the first half of this movie is I think quite brilliant. How he rises up. What did y'all think?
I really like this movie a lot. I actually posted it as my number 2 of what we've watched in Film Club. So I was quite a big fan of it. I like the way it's really kind of telling two different stories at once in a lot of ways. Like while it doesn't use flashbacks in a lot of ways without going too far into spoilers, we get a lot of hints of what's going on with Xena. Is her name Xena? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And her husband Pete. And we do get answers to that in a very indirect way, which I think is like probably my favorite aspect of the film is how they kind of explore that indirectly. And I also just I really like the main character. I think his name was like something Power, the actor.
Yeah, Tyrone Power, who's a super interesting guy. He's actually a dynasty. He's kind of like a Barrymore style actor, where it's like a complete acting dynasty from vaudeville. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your point.
No, you're good. That's very interesting. I did not know. I did not realize that, but he was great. He really. I think I won't say the film like lives or dies on his shoulders, but he has the ability to elevate it, and I think he really did elevate it a lot.
Yeah, he was my favorite part of the film as well. I liked it. I don't think I liked it as much as you guys. It's sitting pretty at like 30, 31 on my film club ranking. But that's still good. I like pretty much all the top 50. So 31 is not too bad. But yeah, I liked it. You guys obviously know I'm a big noir guy. This is definitely the sort of oddest noir I've ever seen. Not just in terms of like the plot is obviously super different than what you would normally see, but even just how it's like shot and stuff. There's no like smoky rooms and dark alleyways and lots of shadow play like you'd see in a lot of the more maybe just more straight-laced crimey noirs. This is definitely something a little different, but it has that cynicism, that sort of nihilistic fatalistic tone that sort of drives through film noirs. This film definitely has that in spades as well. It's a really dark film, which is really sort of adds to its atmosphere. But yeah, I agree, Tyrone Power was great. His eyes especially, he just had these sort of like piercing eyes that just went right through you. I thought he was fantastic.
I think there's a cool connection with him too, because like at the beginning of the film, we see like, all the stuff he's doing is pretty harmless. It's parlor tricks. People kind of go to the carnival knowing like, God, this isn't real. And then slowly watching him do these things, which to him is no different, but it just kind of shows that despicable nature. And he plays that like so well.
Yeah, like his sort of turn, which I suppose we'll get more into when we get into spoiler territory, but his progression as a character was like still supernatural is probably the wrong term. It was very natural. I didn't want to cause confusion. We're talking about a film about fake psychics. I didn't want to cause confusion by saying supernatural. It was very natural, his turn and his sort of downward spiral that he took. There wasn't a lot of humming and hawing or self-reflection. It was all just very, okay, let's do this. Let's try this. Let's try this.
This is the next step, yeah.
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 So he has two,
do it, Chris. Sorry.
Well, he has two strong women in his life, right? So as he's kind of leaving three, I guess.
Three.
He has Joan Blondell. And then as he leaves the circus or the carnival, it's Colleen Gray playing Molly, right? Who kind of follows him and starts to build this empire with him. Once he sees himself as somebody who's bigger than the carnival, more important than the carnival, he's going to go make a fortune. And then he runs into my favorite character, which is Helen Walker, right, as Lily, the psychiatrist. I think not only the way that her character is used, which I'm sure we'll get into, but just the presence she has on screen and the confidence that she plays against him. From the very first scene, I just was hooked. Every time they were together in the room, I was completely hooked. I could have seen 2 hours of just them.
Yeah,
well,
doesn't it?
Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Adam.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to note that, kind of the thing that makes the use of all three of the women really interesting is that power dynamic. You have Xena, who, has, I don't want to say power over him, but in a sense, she understands what's going on. She teaches him the ropes. And then, he moves on to Molly, who he has serious power dynamic over. He's able to manipulate her pretty well. And that allows him to, I guess, spread his wings even a little bit more. And then you get into, was her name Rita or Miss Ritter?
Lilith Ritter. Ritter. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that is, like Chris was talking about, is his equal, or at least how he, we won't go too far into that. Actually, I'm going to stop saying anything before I go too far with that. But
well, look, I think this is the part, because really we don't really get much interest in discussion on the whole film without getting into spoiler territory. So look, if you haven't seen Nightmare Alley or you're planning on going to see the new one, maybe sort of skip ahead now. I'll put some timestamps in the episode description as to when you can come back in, because it's really hard to discuss this film without getting into spoiler territory. So continue with your point, Zach, knowing that you can now talk freely about everything.
Okay, and I was just, because the question really is with Lily is whether or not it is someone who holds equal power to him, or is it a perception of himself? Because that's kind of where the end of the film is alluding to. I would love to hear what you guys kind of perceive their last scene together. I don't know if it's supposed to be straightforward or not, but it's this idea that maybe she's the equal because it's just him, or how he perceives himself, or if it really is someone who's got one over on him.
Yeah, like I think she plays him really well. Like, it's like you said, it's a super interesting dynamic that he has with all three women in the film. There isn't really like with a film noir, you usually have one set femme fatale. She's either the love interest, or she sort of plays with the main character and she then turns on him. Like Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity. Like there's always that one femme fatale. Whereas this film doesn't have any, but it has like all three split across three women. So like, because like Lily, she never she plays partner with him, but it's clear that she's a villain the whole way through, because they're going to be they're scamming people. It's not as if they're trying to be pals or anything like that. They pretty much decide to scam people from nearly at the get-go. They decide they're going to pull off this sort of crime together, and then obviously she completely outsmarts him by making him think he's starting to go crazy and everything like that, and she completely gets one over on him. But then obviously you have other characters, like Joan Blondell's character, who I thought was great, because Joan Blondell is great, I suppose. Xena, like I said, she has no power over him in a physical sense, or she doesn't hold anything over him like the psychologist does. But she's the one who teaches him everything he knows. He's only in the position because of her teachings. And then obviously Molly is interesting in that degree as well, because she is more so like how a femme fatale character starts, on his side, working with him, wanting him to succeed. If I thought anyone was going to turn, if this was a normal film noir, Molly would have been, there would be no Lilith character. Molly would be the one who would be turning on. So it's an interesting dynamic the way they sort of split the femme fatale across almost three characters.
His relationship with Molly in general is really interesting because by the end, it's hard to really fully read his feelings towards her because he kind of contradicts himself a lot during it. Because obviously, like at one point, he uses the "I love you" card when he needs it the most. He needs her to stay, so he tells her, "Like I'm finally going to tell you this," blah blah blah. And then when she kind of ruins his entire plan, she ruins his future. He still wants her there, which I did not really figure was going to be in his character to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting that obviously even like the last thing he does when he starts to go on the run towards the end of the film is just make sure that she got away safe and she wasn't going to get involved in any of the trouble or anything like that. Their dynamic is definitely interesting. I suppose maybe he's sort of at the end of it, he's just kind of he gets a good look at himself in the mirror, and he realizes, the shit he's been pulling isn't right. And, as a sort of last ditch attempt to make amends, he'll just try and save what he perceives as an innocent bystander to his scams, just try and get her out of the woods.
But there's examples of entirely selfish people who also do selfless things, right? Like it's possible that he does have feelings, like genuine feelings for her, and that's confusing because she's not going along with him each step of the way. Like I'm thinking of, I don't know if this is an American term or an international term. Do you know the term Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, pyramid schemes, basically, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
No, a little different.
Pyramid I'm gonna learn something. Too.
I've definitely heard the term.
So a Ponzi scheme, the simplest way to say it is, I'm going to borrow $1,000 from you with a promise of 10x return. So I'm going to give you $10,000 in return.
Okay.
And then I go raise $1,000 from everybody else, promising them $10,000 in return. Mm-hmm. And the only way that I get the money in return is by borrowing more money. So I'm not actually doing with it. I'm just building up this incredible wealth. And some people are getting their money back, and so they kind of leave with these testimonials, which then helps more people donate or give to the cause. And because I'm telling you, like, well, if I give you 10x return, I just want 10% back. So then I'm getting wealthy by fulfilling your 10x return, but the whole thing falls apart the second that people stop giving. It's like this never-ending thing, right? And it's illegal because you're not actually doing anything with the business. So I'm not saying that he's running a Ponzi scheme. What I'm saying is there are people that build like $10 billion portfolios that are Ponzi schemes. And I've always been interested in this because there's a moment in time where it's harmless, relatively harmless. And there's a moment in time when your scheme gets so big that it has an entire state's teacher's retirement fund in it. And when the fund goes under, you have 3 million people losing their entire retirement fund.
Yeah, and then that goes back a lot to where outsiders will sometimes blame the victims, saying they were dumb enough to fall for it, when it's losing the context of why they did it in the first place.
Well, no, for sure. And I guess what I'm wondering, that's an interesting point, and I don't know that that's directly something that happens here in the film, but that is a side effect of that, which is unfortunate. But where I was tying it back in was to say that, like, these people that are running these schemes, it's easy to paint them as devils or as the lowest scum of the earth because they are knowingly now taking all these funds, right? But there's another thing that happens, which I think happens here, which is at some point the scam becomes larger than the person who's running it. And
yeah, because I mean,
in it.
Yeah, because we see the natural progression here. When they start, they're just, like I said, doing a parlor trick. How do you guess people's questions and make it seem like you're a mind reader? And that slowly turns into, is my daughter going to be okay? And you're like, well, how do I make them convinced? And it's like, well, here's your daughter's name. Here's how you're lying to me, stuff like that. And it's just a progression of, how do I keep selling this parlor trick? And before you know it, you're trying to get a radio station and trying to get a bunch of money from a guy because he thinks you can like reunite him with his, deceased love interest from 35 years ago.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's such a powerful scene, because that's when he made a conscious decision to do something deceptive. And that's the first time we see that, right? I think up until that point, he was having fun. And then there's a moment where everybody in his life tells him, no, that's too far. And he like pushes through it. And he's like, no, we've got to do this. We can get a tavern, or not a tavern, a temple and a radio station and like all these things, right? Like, and it's the first time I think where it's like in his mind, it's clear that this is too far and he pushes through it. And I thought that was a really powerful scene in that way.
Yeah, like there's a fine line between what he does, there's a fine line here between what is the game, what is the parlor trick, the mind readers crap, versus what's fraud.
Yeah.
At that point, he was willing to accept a large sum of money to knowingly deceive someone that had a lot of emotional investment in what they were going to be seeing. When you go to a mentalist show, like these people were going to they were in the scenes, in that sort of whatever it was, a bar or a cafe, whatever that sort of place where he was doing his psychic tricks, where people were going specifically to see him and have him do these things. Whereas what he does then with Molly dressing up as the ghost of your man's long lost love, that is taking a large sum of money, that is emotionally abusing someone essentially, and stealing from them. So there's a very fine line there that he has no problem crossing.
Yeah, and it's also, almost like he gets to like almost like I guess another sort of term when you're talking about schemes is like sunken cost. Like he's like, well, I've already put way too much effort into this to not go through with it, to not finish this, to not just let one person tell me this isn't right. Especially when he's kind of got, the devil and the angel on his shoulder, where, he's obviously got Molly who's telling him this is wrong, this is immoral. And then he's got Lily who's, helping him. She's the one telling him the information, or he's perceiving that, and he's figuring out how to get away with it.
Yeah, and this is where the psychology of like a megalomaniac is so interesting, right? Because he, at that moment, you see him see himself as invincible. And that's when he's actually the most vulnerable.
Yeah, because I mean, you have to get to these. Like, I mean, like let's say he's at a carnival and he screws up the trick. Who cares? He'll go to the next one. Nothing changes. No one's hurt. It's fine. He screws up this thing with what's his name? Gil. It starts with a G, but I can't think of his name. But the man who has the love interest.
Yeah.
I mean, if he screws it up, he's immoral for taking his money, but there's no way he'll ever have a reputation again. So he's putting that huge risk out there. And on the other end, he is, if he's successful, it's bad anyway. Like he's successful and he gets everything he wants, but in all honesty, based on his character, that's not going to be the end of it. There's always going to be the ambition to go further.
Exactly.
I suppose it ties into the end of the film. There's a really great line. There's a great exchange towards. I think it's actually the last two lines of the film, and I wrote them down as I liked them so much. So it's after Stan is completely gone to rock bottom, alcoholic, babbling fool, maniac, which we'll talk about in a second in terms of the cyclical nature of this film and how amazing that was put together. But there's a great line at the end after they've seen him go on a sort of crazed run around through the carnival where he's back at. And a guy asks the new leader of the carnival, how can a guy get so low? And the guy goes, you reach too high. And that's where the film ends. So, that's sort of how, he just kept going one step, just to try and get more money. Sort of, he got the dollar signs in his eyes. And suddenly it was just like a complete plummet. There was no gradual downfall. There was no, okay, let's go back to doing the stuff in the cafes. It was a fall from grace is the only way to really describe the trajectory that Stan took. So I really love that sort of closing line. How can a guy get so low? You reach too high, and that's essentially what he did here. He would have been fine just continuing to do what he was doing. He was making money. He was making people happy. He himself seemed fine, but he got greedy and just kept reaching. He wanted more. He wanted more. Got more elaborate, and then just fell.
It's just, yeah, it's a lot of very much story of Icarus sort of tale.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we kind of get a little bit of backstory of what made him, maybe where he gets this ambition from. I think they mentioned he grew up in an orphanage. He had no one in his life. So it's almost like this idea of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just never stop. And it ends up, that I guess you'd say character flaw is the end of it for him.
Now there was a contentious point in sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if this takes us off track, but I was just thinking of this. I don't know if this movie would get made today because like
it's being made in like 3 weeks' time, Chris. It's coming out soon.
That's a funny thing to say. You're right. It's literally coming out.
The remake is coming out.
That's funny. Well, I don't know if the message resonates though, because you look at like Bill Gates, or you look at the guy from Amazon, Bezos, like they just keep reaching, right? Elon Musk, like they just kind of keep reaching, and it works great for them.
Which I guess you could sit there and say, it's not like Jeff Bezos has a good reputation. I think one thing people might enjoy is watching a fall from grace, or watching the people on the top be knocked down. So,
and also at the same time, this Stan guy, he was never at that level anyway. I'm sure for every Jeff Bezos, there's a million other guys who were getting there and then fell off. So,
well, and I mean, say what you want about the businesses, but they are doing it legitimately. I mean, there's no trick. I mean, like they're building a business. That's different from what Stan was doing of actively deceiving people.
Oh yeah, for
sure. Say you're getting deceived on your bathroom breaks at Amazon.
Amazon, please don't sue us. Anyway, that's sorry. Yeah, the point I was just going to make really quick. I know we're sort of going a bit long on this one, because it just kind of ties into what we were just talking about there about reaching and falling and everything like that. And it was a kind of a contentious point that I had put in my review that you had replied to, Chris. And I'm just kind of interested to hear you elaborate on. I had essentially summed this film up as a cautionary tale of the dangers of going for the American dream. Maybe I wasn't clear about that in my written review. I'm not discouraging people to chase their dreams. I'm not saying everyone who chases their dreams is going to end up like a crazy man in a carnival. But I just think it's a cautionary tale for being too greedy. Maybe once enjoy the success you have, rather than maybe sort of getting the dollar signs and not thinking everything through. So that's kind of what I meant, but you gave me a very interesting reply, and I'd like to sort of hear you talk about that a little bit, because you come from an interesting background. So
it's just a semantics point on tying the American dream to greed, because I think I completely understand why those two things would be tied together in your mind. I just know that growing up with my dad was born in 1953, so he was a part of that post-war, what are they called, the boomers or whatever, and like for that American dream was so central to that era, that generation, right? And it kind of meant different things to different people, but the central theme behind it was hope, right? And this idea that like for people coming over from a different country, or for people coming up from poverty, you're never more than 1 or 2 generations away from a comfortable life. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody becomes Bezos, right? Or, so along the way, now, that's not me saying that you're wrong in writing that. I think what happens is, it's like the whole reason communism doesn't work is because on paper it's a great idea, but if you have a system where everybody's getting paid no matter how hard they work, people stop working, right? I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but like that's the common critique on something like socialism or communism in its purest form, right? Is that there's going to be some people that are carrying the load and some people that are not working, because that's kind of like human nature. And I think just in the same way, one of the things that's become true from this idea of the American dream is that there are people that are going to try to achieve that dream through any means possible. In which case, I think that's the cautionary tale, and that's the warning sign. And I totally agree with that side of it.
Absolutely, and that's what I was more meaning about it as well. I wasn't telling people don't go chase your dreams, people, accept where you are. I wasn't telling people that. Yeah, it was definitely just that. Like, there's two sides to every coin. I think. Yeah, you said I have your reply up here, and you said it perfectly. There's a difference between being the Wolf of Wall Street than owning a corner store.
Yeah.
There's a fine line there between getting your way by greed and deceiving people versus working hard and chasing that dream. That's absolute. If you're working hard, that's great, perfect. You get to where you are because of hard work. Amazing, kudos to you. If you get there by scamming people, then I hope you get your comeuppance the same way Mr. Stan did.
Yeah,
right. I think it's interesting to tie into your recent watch, Adam, with There Will Be Blood, because it's sort of the same story, Instead of I don't want to spoil There Will Be Blood because I don't think Chris has seen it yet, but their endings are very different but very similar. I'll say that much.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think a lot of these films, about we mentioned it earlier with Colonel Blimp about these sort of rise to power films. They usually always end up with the protagonist. If the protagonist got there, through deceiving or crime, they normally end up getting the shit end of the stick. You see it with like Goodfellas, where he just ends up a nobody, a schmuck. You see it in, obviously, I know the Wolf of Wall Street is based on real life, but he ends up in prison at the end and everything like that. So you usually see it with these kind of films where people sort of work their way through greed and manipulation. They normally end up getting maybe not, well, they don't always lose everything, but they usually end up unhappy.
Yeah, and I guess that's the predictable nature. Like, one thing I was really worried about, I really didn't want Nightmare Alley to win because I'm really looking forward to Guillermo del Toro's version. So I was like, it's going to spoil the whole thing for me. But it does make a great point that it's like this movie really can't end another way.
Yeah,
no, it was teed up perfectly from the very beginning. And I loved. As soon as I started realizing where it was going, I loved it because this idea of essentially him stuck in the cycle, back to square one. Obviously, the film starts with Xena and her alcoholic husband that used to do mentalist tricks back in the day until the husband became an alcoholic, and now it just ends up the same thing, except he's with Molly and she's looking after him at the carnival while he's the hopeless alcoholic, and it's probably going to go again. It's a really cool way they did it with the whole cyclical nature and how it ties back to sort of prophesized by Xena and her husband.
I had this like kind of dumb thought, but for a second I thought it was going to go in this direction, where we see like at the beginning of the film they're like chasing this guy that they're calling a geek or whatever, and so at the end of the film when they were doing the same thing with Stan, I was like, oh, is this going to be like a Shutter Island type of ending where the whole time just a replay of this?
I don't think they would have had the balls to do that. Like, this film was ballsy enough as it is for this era. I don't think they would have had that much balls to do that.
But I did actually want to bring up, and I won't bring up too much, but one aspect I really thought was interesting about this is the use of supernatural, the actual word supernatural, not the confusing thing Adam was going to say. But this idea that, almost everything we see is, explainable. They're using a code. They're doing this. But the one thing that is never given an explanation is the tarot cards, and the sense of, it seems like the one truth in this movie is the tarot cards are always right. And, they're supposed to be the same sort of parlor trick, but in the film, they're given almost like this supernatural precedence in a sort.
Yeah.
There is that vague supernaturalism around it. And I'm sorry, this might sound like an absolutely stupid question, but it confused me, and I don't recall ever getting an answer, or at least I don't remember seeing an answer. But when Stan first, is doing the stuff, and Lily's there in the crowd, and she lies on the card, how does he know she was lying?
I think that is just intuition. Like, I think
okay,
That's kind of how I read it.
Because
He
I
could
thought it
just
was
kind of
implying
tell
that maybe he did have a little bit there, but
and
never so much so to explicitly say it. Just kind of hint that maybe he has more power than he's letting on.
and that could very well be it. I think that's so vague, but it's almost like I kind of felt like the film was going with he's a street kid. He's learned what's legitimate, how to read people, and he uses that to and it may have been the way she phrased the question, because she phrases it in a very cold way. Like, I can't remember exactly how she words the question, but I do remember it being a very cold way to ask about if your sick mother is going to make it.
Yeah, something along those lines. Okay,
If
sorry
this
if that
was
was.
if this was a Vinegar Syndrome film, he would have the touch, and he would have just a light version of the touch. And then throughout the 90 minutes, he would finally unlock his superpower and have a moment of like where he like explodes into seeing like every voice in the world or something. And
He's got the shine.
the shine.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's ever. I think that's left a little bit ambiguous. Is my takeaway on that? Like, I kind of like the way you said it, Zach. I think he was a street kid, and he just kind of, has this like deep intuition from having to survive for so long. But we never see an example of him being wrong either.
Right. And that's what I was waiting on that scene. I was like, oh, here we go. This is going to be the turning moment for him. And it was, but not in the way I thought it was going to be.
Right. So if we never see him wrong, then maybe there's something else that they're kind of touching on. But
yeah, because it does have ambiguous moments for it as well. That part where he's confronting Lily, and he can hear the police sirens, and she's like, "Oh, there is no police sirens." Is she gaslighting him? Is he actually imagining it? It's again, it's left ambiguous.
Yeah, and I was like, when that was coming, that's why I was wondering if it was like maybe I didn't read the scene right, but I was like, that's not supposed, like, we're not supposed to exactly know the answer to that, right? Like,
yeah, I don't think so either. Yeah, I think it's left ambiguous, which is really cool for a film of this era to do. You don't see that a lot. That's what I was saying at the very start. This is not a bog standard film noir. It's very interesting. It does a lot of things. It's a ballsy film, as I said a few minutes ago. It's a ballsy film, and I have a lot of appreciation for it. Even if I didn't love it as much as you guys, I do have a lot of appreciation for what it does. Cool. So we're wrapping up the end of the podcast, which as always, I say as always, we've been kind of skipping it a couple of recent weeks, but we're going to do any other business just where we talk about something we've seen recently that we liked and we want to give a shout out to. It doesn't have to be on the Criterion channel. Doesn't even have to be any good. Just something that you liked that you think you want to give a quick shout out to. I always go first in this segment, and I'm not going to go first this time. Zach, what do you got for us?
Okay, so we are in December, so it is time for those Christmas movies to come out. Most of mine are horror. I know that's a shock to everyone here. One I really want to talk about, and I think it's one that got a lot of hate when it released, and it was because it was a remake of a classic. Of course, in 1974, Bob Clark created Black Christmas and became, the reason that slasher movies exist, gave Halloween what it was, and went from there and got a lot of appreciation later. So in 2006, Dimension Films decided to make a remake that was a much more trashy and 2000s slasher for Black Christmas, which a lot of people hated. And I absolutely love that movie a lot. It is absolutely overly gory. It's overly trashy. It's everything that Bob Clark's isn't. 74s is a very classy sort of film in its own way. It's a 70s slasher. This one, you have eyes getting jammed out, you have it, but I think that's what I like about it. Like, when you talk about remakes, I can sit there and I'll bring up Rob Zombie's Halloween remake, and I'm like, I don't like the trashy nature of it, because I think where Black Christmas succeeded the year before was that it committed to it. Rob Zombie's, I think where it failed was this idea that he wants to make this trashy thing, but then he spends the second half of the movie just doing a one-for-one remake of John Carpenter's with slightly more trash to it. I like the commitment in the 2006 one because it feels like a completely different experience. I don't spend my time comparing them, which is really nice. It's just taking the same basic premise and just doing its own thing with it, similar characters, but it's its own trashy little thing that I enjoy watching every year. It's actually pretty well shot. I just finished watching it earlier today. Really good colors. Like 2000s horror was filmed with this really gray and dirty look, and this one has like these Christmas lights that really add to the cinematography and add to the colors of the film. And I don't know, I just like it, and I feel like I'm the only person I found that does, but I figured I'd give it a shout out for this type of season if somebody wanted to give it a chance and rewatch it.
What did you think of two questions for you? What did you think of Marcus Nispel's Friday the 13th?
I like it. I mean, I like both of his remakes. They did a Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well.
Yeah.
And, with Friday 13th, he basically just took the highlight reel of the first 4 films and made his own thing. And I was like, it has the best Jason. Sorry, Kane Hodder, but Derek Mears is awesome as Jason. And I mean, it's kind of a fast version of Friday without all the boring stuff in it.
Well, he takes the first 4 movies and basically makes them into like a 5-minute or 10-minute sequence before the credits, right? And then he makes like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but with Jason or something. Like Jason is terrifying in the remake.
Yeah, like he's cruel. They made him like a survivalist. I mean, most of the time, a lot of Jason kills are pretty quick and to the point. Like, we're just here to see what gnarly instrument he uses. But this one, I mean, he throws a girl over like a fire while she's in a sleeping bag. I mean, that's pretty hardcore, and that's really cruel and mean spirited. But I like it.
And then Snyder's Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, I love Snyder's, and that's really what it comes.
Of course, he was going to say good things about Snyder film.
No, I was going to like Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. I do not think it's better than Romero's. I will point that out. But if you're going to remake Romero, I mean, do it this way. The 78 Dawn of the Dead is slow paced. It's very character focused. You have slow moving zombies. You have all that other stuff. Snyder basically peels that back and says, this is an action horror movie. We're going to give you the fun, and we're going to lose the, we're focused on the cool factor. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to appreciate a remake that does that, because, if you're going to do it your own way.
Yeah, totally agree.
So one thing I'll say about Black Christmas, I haven't seen the original, but I have seen the one you're referring to. And I was purposely avoiding the original because I assumed it was as sleazy and trashy as the remake, which has an abhorrent scene featuring a mother and child that I will not talk about, because
it's Black Christmas in Alabama. I mean, straight up,
it's abhorrent. It is. I remember I watched that when I was maybe, I don't know, 14, 15, 16. I can't remember exactly what age I was when it came out, but it was only pretty new out when I saw it. And yeah, it was horrific. Now I'm glad that the original is good, so I'll probably watch that one.
Yeah, I will tell you, and this is, John Carpenter originally was interested in making a Black Christmas sequel, and Bob Clark told him not to do it and use a lot of his ideas for his own thing, which he would use in Halloween. Halloween is so based off of Black Christmas specifically, and like tone. Now, I will say Carpenter, I think, is a more talented director. Obviously, I'll think that, but Bob Clark's classic Black Christmas is great. Of course, 10 years later, he would do a Christmas Story. So, I'm sure you may have seen that one at least. Have you seen that one? Don't Shoot Your Eye Out. Oh, okay, maybe that's a big American thing.
I don't know what we call it, but yeah, I'll definitely watch the original Black Christmas, because I was always put off by my horrible memories of the remake. So there we go.
It has nothing about a mother and son relationship in.
Okay, that's nice.
None of that is in. That is all made up. Remake.
I could slightly palate it if they didn't show it so graphically. If it was implied, I could have palated it, but to actually show it in scenes, I was like, no, there's no need. But yeah, I'll jump in next if Chris doesn't mind. So I sat down about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, maybe even a little bit longer. I was playing Football Manager on my Mac in front of the TV, like I do most evenings these days. My girlfriend said, I'm going to watch a film. I thought, kudos to you. I'm just going to sit here and play my game. You work away. She'll normally put on some rom-com or, some Netflix-y kind of film, Christmas Prince, whatever, that shit, that kind of film. And she said, oh, look what I have here. It's the Princess Diana biopic. And I thought, oh, whoop-de-fucking-do, a biopic about a royal. This is going to be terrible. This film is fucking nuts. This is I can't even call it a biopic. This film is as close to The Shining as you will ever get outside of The Shining. It is just crazy good. It's directed by a dude called Pablo Larraín. If you haven't heard of the film, Kristen Stewart's in it. It literally only just came out just a couple of months ago, I think back in September. And it's just absolutely nuts. It's just full of tense atmosphere, Lynchian almost atmosphere, a crazy, creepy score from Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead, whose scores I always love, and I'm a huge Radiohead fan, so that's always a plus for me. But yeah, it was honestly, it's so Kubrickian in how it's shot. Kirsten Stewart does an amazing job as Diana, but like this is not a biopic in any way. It literally just takes place over 3 days as she slowly loses her marbles and loses her sort of sense of identity and reality. It's just something I did not expect in my wildest dreams when my girlfriend sat down and said, I'm going to watch a biopic on Princess Diana. She hated it. She thought it was, she hated it so much. She was like, I slowly got into it. I was like, these opening credits are cool. It's like The Shining, with the sort of helicopter shots. And this is cool opening credits. But I was still kind of playing my game. And slowly but surely, I was turned and fully focused on the TV, and she was more and more engaged with her phone. I could tell that she absolutely hated it, but I loved it. I thought it was incredible. Honestly, I think it's probably the best like 2021 film I've seen this year. I admittedly have not seen a lot of new films this year, but this is probably the best one. It's crazy good, and it's not even that long. It's like about less than 2 hours. If you have a chance,
like 3
to
hours, Adam be here like, this is the worst movie I have seen this year. I
no,
honestly believe it.
Honestly, it's different when like it's described all the way on IMDb. It's always like blank is a 2001 blank and a list of genres. So this is described as a historical fiction psychological drama. That's how like Wikipedia describes it. It's a fucking nuts film. If you get a chance to watch it, watch Spencer. It is just, I don't know if I said the name of the film. It's called Spencer. It was heavily marketed, heavily mismarketed. I'm sure a lot of people walked out of the theater going, "What the fuck did we just watch?" Because honestly, it's like a nightmare. It's amazing. I love it.
I've been really wanting to see it. I didn't get. I had to go to like an hour and a half out to an art house theater to see stuff like that. So I didn't get a chance to.
Really, I'm not surprised. It's so heavily marketed here in Ireland. Like no, maybe it's just because obviously we're so close to England. A lot of our young Irish people are sort of interested in, especially Diana. They're kind of interested in her, from a celebrity standpoint. So it was very heavily marketed here, which is why I assumed it was just a general run of the mill biopic that was going to bore me to tears, and not the Kubrickian nightmare that it actually is.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get to see it soon because I have been on like the Kristen Stewart train for like 5 years, and I'm hoping it'll kind of get like Robert Pattinson got, because I was like, yeah, I'm kind of tired of the Twilight comments at this point. I was like, that was like a decade ago now. They're kind of getting a little
honestly
old.
I see this all the time as well. The only people who make those comments are people who've never watched their films after Twilight. I especially like when Pattinson was made Batman, I saw like a load of people that I was sort of in high school with, secondary school as we call it here. I'm not putting myself in your standards. People I went to secondary school with going, "Oh, the sparkly vampire is going to be Batman. This is fucking stupid." I'm like, have you ever seen any other Robert Pattinson film? Have you ever actually even seen Twilight? Probably not.
No. Yeah, like she gets a lot of hate for like playing Bella, and I was like, I will disclose I have read the Twilight books.
Same.
Because my girlfriend was like, not my girlfriend. My girlfriend and my sister at the time were like, you can't make fun of it unless you've read it. And I'm like, okay, I will be that petty and I will read them. And they're not good. They're not good. But Kristen Stewart played Bella exactly as she's portrayed in the book.
Yeah.
That's not her fault that this character sucks.
She did her best with the shit she was given.
Exactly. And I mean, hell, if I was, their age and I was given this like multi-million-dollar project, I was like, fuck yeah, dude, I'll do it.
We talked about this in the last podcast. Yeah, make your fucking money, then go do what you want. That's what they've been doing now for years. Kristen Stewart won the French equivalent of a fucking Oscar.
Yeah,
Clouds of Silmaria.
Yeah, that's it. And then and then she did Personal Shopper, which is fantastic. Yeah. I haven't seen Clouds yet, but I've seen Personal Shopper, and that one's awesome.
You know,
It's
they made the right decision. They got all their money young. They're probably still getting royalties to this day. They'll probably get them for the
exactly.
rest of their life. And now they can just have the freedom to make whatever the fuck they want forever.
It's called "Fuck You Money" for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they have a single regret. I really, even with all the comments they get, I don't think they have a regret about it. I sure wouldn't.
Work
Yeah.
smart, kids, sell out, and then you can do whatever you want afterwards. It's great.
Yeah, that honestly, that's the advantage. Sell out first, because then nobody can
Yeah.
call you a sellout later.
Precisely. If you sell out first and then you like build everything up for the next 10, 20 years, yeah, people will still remember you or, you know, in that big role. But people will then also go, oh, yeah, but he's actually it turned out he's actually really good, rather than, you know, being in art house shit for 20 years and then selling out. Then you're just going to be a sellout. But if you do it the other way around, people are suddenly like, oh, but actually, it turns out he's actually a really good actor and he was just making money. That's cool. Kudos to him.
Like, I just can't wait until Daniel Day-Lewis shows up in what are the Fast and Furious 10?
I would love it. I would actually go see a Fast and Furious movie in theaters.
Hell yeah, hell yeah.
See Daniel Day-Lewis rock up and just go, family. It's like Vin Diesel's father. It's like, oh shit, it's Daniel Day.
Universal, please get him out of retirement.
Yeah, throw money at him.
So I'll go. I'm just gonna quickly run through the 312 movies that I saw in a ranking order.
You got 15 minutes. Go.
No, I want to highlight. So I saw. I felt like I was kind of seeing a lot of, famous sort of important movies back to back, and I needed a genre bender. So I've been seeing a fair amount of genre films. There's a movie from the mid '90s called The Grave. Have either one of y'all seen that?
I don't think so. I don't think I have.
It's basically just like a ghost story. It's a simple movie. I loved it. It's just it's like a campfire story. Not a ghost story, I guess, but it's just like one of those campfire kind of like tales about people that try to rob a grave, and then somebody gets the idea to go try it for themselves, and chaos ensues. It's great. It's a simple story, exactly what I want out of a genre film. A few twists, nothing crazy. Then I saw Angel. Have y'all seen that? The 1983 Angel?
I have not. I'm adding all these to my list though.
Not from me, dog.
Angel's crazy. Like, the actress looks 12. It turns out she's 25 when she made the movie. But she plays a 15-year-old who's goes to a private school in the day, and she's a straight A student. And at night, she's a prostitute. And I guess that was legal at 15 in the 80s. I don't know how the laws have changed over the years, but they don't mention anything about her being too young. In fact, there's this really awkward line where someone who purchased her services for the night says, "You better tell me you're 14 or I'm going to send you back for being too old." Which I shouldn't laugh at. I was like, what the hell is going on? It doesn't show her. Is that true? I don't think she's naked in the movie. It has nudity in it, but it's not. It's more just it's this crazy movie where her parents aren't around, and so she's kind of taken under, like, people from the street kind of take her under their wings, and so her surrogate mother is a trans woman who's dressed in full drag or dressed in women's clothing, and is this real loud, kind of vivacious character. And her surrogate father is this artist, kind of building manager who lives downstairs. And it's her adventures. Like, yeah, it's a weird, dark film with like comedy in it and unexpected places. It's good. Like, I was not expecting to like it, but Vinegar Syndrome put it out, so I thought I would give it a shot. And it's got way more depth to it than I thought it would.
Well, I noticed like all the people I follow on Letterboxd who've seen it, which you haven't put yours on there yet. I assume that's one of your 4. All of them have given it high stars. So I was like, okay, must be my sort of thing.
Yeah. And then Ticks is, we talked about a little bit. I can't remember if it was for the Patreon part. It might have been. But it has Carlton from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air right smack in the middle of his career in 1993. Like, when he was Carlton, playing this horror movie where he gets infected by these kind of large ticks, and it's hilarious. And his young Seth Green, and it's just a very over the top, wonderful body kind of creature horror film. So it was good. I've been loving this genre bender that I've been on.
I don't think I'll be adding any of those to my watch list, Chris. I won't lie to you.
I added 2 of them, if that makes you feel any better.
It really shows how diverse of a podcast we are. Come to They Live by Film for your criterion and your shit.
I think Chris plays a good middle in between me and you, Adam.
Yeah, devil's advocate almost.
Yep. I need both. I need both in my life.
Hey, look, the way you guys treat your shitty, schlocky horror films was how I treat my Marvel films, I suppose. So we all have our vices.
There you go. Have you all seen? There's a funny meme where it's this picture of some cartoon character, I can't remember which one, with the fridge open, shoveling in a slice of cake, and on the top it says "Art House people when no one's looking," and then over the cake it says "Blockbusters."
Yeah, that's a good meme. That's very.
Yeah.
Well, it has some truth to it, because you'll always have those people who watch a lot, like they'll always talk only about art house stuff, but as soon as you start bringing up stuff, they have an opinion on it because they have seen it.
Exactly.
They'll watch it anyway.
Exactly.
That wraps up this week's episode of They Live by Film. If you want to read more of our thoughts, visit theylivebyfilm.com. And you can also follow our Letterboxd, Reddit, and Instagram accounts from the links in the description. For now, take care.